May 1947. Texas City, Texas. The Gulf wind carries salt and oil smoke across a small frame house on the north side of town, where a woman of 34 stands at her kitchen table reading a letter that says her husband's death was nobody's fault. He went to work on the chemical docks one morning and never came home. Now the company says it owes her nothing, an act of God, they call it. She has 4 children, a stack of bills, and a settlement check that will never come. At a filling station across the road, a lean young man in a work shirt pauses with the gas nozzle in his hand and watches her through the screen door. Nobody recognizes him yet. Here is the story. Her name was Lorene Babcock. She was 34 years old in the spring of 1947, and 6 weeks earlier she had become a widow. Lorene was born Lorene Tatum in 1913 in Galveston County, the daughter of a Gulf fisherman who ran shrimp boats out of the bay. She grew up on the water and the docks, in the salt and the heat, in a family that understood the Gulf gives a living, and now and then takes a man for it. She was raising 4 children of her own by 1947: Wesley, who was 12, the twins, June and Joan, who were 9, and little Raymond, who was 5 and had his father's grin. Her husband was Earl Babcock. Earl worked the chemical and grain docks at the port, a strong, easygoing man who loaded and stored cargo, who sang in the Baptist choir off-key and proud, who could fix anything with a length of wire and a pocket knife. He and Lorene married in 1933, in the worst of the Depression, and they built a life one hard year at a time in a little frame house on 7th Street North. Lorene had a particular thing about her. When she was a girl of 8, a shrimp boat winch had snapped a cable that caught her across the left forearm, and it had healed into a thin, pale scar that curved from her wrist to her elbow like a watermark. She was never ashamed of it. She said it was the Gulf's signature on her, proof she'd grown up on the water. When she was worried, she'd run her right thumb slowly along that old scar, back and forth, the way another woman might twist a ring. She kept a good house on Earl's dock wages. That spring the radio played Tex Williams and Smoke. 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 And the new Eddie Arnold songs, and the children fought over the dial. Bread was 13 cents a loaf. Earl drove a tired 1939 Ford pickup, gray primer over green, that he kept alive with parts from the junkyard on Texas Avenue. Earl Babcock was killed at the docks in the spring of 1947, in a fire and blast at a warehouse where chemical cargo was stored, a stack of material that should never have been kept the way it was kept, in heat it should never have seen. Earl and 2 other dockmen died trying to fight it before it went up. The company called it a tragedy, an accident, an act of God. Earl was 36, and Lorene Babcock, who had grown up knowing the Gulf could take a man, now learned something harder, that after it took him, the company he died for would close its books and turn its back, and leave a woman with 4 children and her husband's name, and nothing else at all. On the morning of May 27, 1947, at 11:00, Lorene went down to the offices of the Gulf Coast Terminal and Storage Company on the Strand to ask about the compensation owed her husband's family. The man who saw her was a claims officer named Vernon Hatch, in a seersucker suit, with a folder he did not really open. He read from a single typed page. Mrs. Babcock, the company's position is that the event of April was an unforeseeable accident, an act of God, for which the company bears no legal liability. Your husband's employment ended with his death. There is no provision for a death benefit to dock labor under these circumstances. The company extends its condolences. He died loading your cargo, Lorene said. Cargo you stored wrong. Everybody on that dock knew it was stored wrong. There's no finding to that effect, ma'am. And condolences are not a legal debt. There were 2 other people waiting in the office, a clerk and another widow, by the look of her black dress. They heard every word. Hatch closed the folder. I'd suggest you apply to the county relief. Good morning. Lorene stood very still. Her right thumb moved once, slowly, along that pale scar on her left forearm. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry in front of the other widow. She gathered her pocketbook and what was left of her dignity, and she walked out onto the strand into the Gulf heat. With 4 children at home and a husband the company had decided to forget. Where are you watching from? Drop your state in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. The lean young man at the filling station was Charles Bronson, though in 1947 he was still Charlie Buczynski, 25 years old, just 2 years out of the war, and not yet anybody at all. He was driving across the country chasing work, the way a lot of ex-servicemen did in those years, and he'd stopped in Texas City to gas up an old car and figure out where his last $40 would take him. He had flown 35 missions as a B-29 tail gunner in the Pacific. He had come home to nothing much a coal miner's son from Pennsylvania, one of 15 children. A man who had grown up watching companies count a working man's life in pennies. His own father had been killed by the mines, and the mine had paid the family almost nothing for it. He knew exactly what Lorene Babcock was standing in. He was paying for his gas at the station across from 7th Street when he heard the attendant and another man talking about the Babcock widow, 4 kids, the company calling it an act of God. The dockmen who all knew that cargo had been stored against every rule there was, and young Charlie Buczynski, who had buried a father a company wouldn't pay for, went very still with the nozzle in his hand. Now a broke 25-year-old drifter could not take on a terminal company. Not with $40 and an old car. And by himself, he couldn't have. But here is what Charlie understood that the company was counting on no one understanding. The men who load a dock see everything, and dockmen talk. And somewhere, somebody had written something down. He didn't leave town. He spent 11 days in Texas City, working day labor on the very docks to pay for a room. And he did the thing the company never expected. He listened to the dockmen, and one of them, an old checker named Silas Pruitt, who logged every load that came across that pier, had kept his tally books. And in Silas Pruitt's own handwriting, dated 3 weeks before the fire, was a notation that the warehouse foreman had been formally warned in writing that the chemical cargo was being stored over the limit, in the heat, against the company's own posted safety rules. The warning had a date. It had a foreman's initials. It had been ignored. Charlie Buczynski couldn't use that. But a lawyer could. He took what little money he had and what he earned on the docks, and he walked into the office of a young Galveston attorney named Thomas Reyes, who'd take a case on contingency, and he laid the old checker's tally book on the desk and told him where to find Silas Pruitt and the other dockmen who'd say the same under oath. Then he did one more thing. He made sure the local paper knew a written safety warning existed, so the company couldn't bury it twice. Act of God does not survive a foreman's signature on a warning he ignored. Faced with its own records and 3 dockmen ready to testify, the Gulf Coast Terminal and Storage Company settled with Lorene Babcock, rather than see that tally book read aloud in a courtroom. The figure was $11,460, a fortune to a dock widow in 1947, and not a dime more than Earl's life and 4 children were owed. Charlie Buczynski's name appeared nowhere. The lawyer worked the case. The dock men testified. A drifter who'd moved on was never mentioned at all. Have you ever had someone refuse to let nobody's fault be the end of it dig until the truth came up, right when the world had closed the books on you? That moment changes everything, doesn't it? Charlie Buczynski was gone before the settlement was ever signed. He'd pointed a young lawyer at an old man's tally book, made sure the truth couldn't be buried, and then he'd gotten back in his tired car with his last few dollars and driven west toward California, toward the long odds of becoming an actor, toward the name the world would later know. Lorene Babcock never knew he existed. The lawyer told her only that a fellow who'd worked the docks a few days had pointed him to Silas Pruitt in the tally book and had not left a name. She assumed he was just another dock hand who'd done a decent thing and moved on. She was righter than she knew. Lorene Babcock did not lose her house, or her children, or herself. The settlement let her keep the frame house on 7th Street North and raise all 4 children to grown. She never remarried. She went to work in 1948, keeping books for the shrimp co-op her own father had once sold his catch to, and she kept those books for 26 years, until she retired in 1974. The dock men's wives never forgot that one of their own had been made whole when the company tried to walk away, and Lorene became, quietly, the woman other dock widows came to when the company tried the same thing on them. She'd lived it. She knew the way through. Her children grew. Wesley, the oldest, went into the merchant marine and then ran tugs in the Houston Ship Channel for 30 years. The twins, June and Joan, became a school teacher and a nurse. Little Raymond, the 5-year-old with his father's grin, became a safety inspector for the state of Texas. The very job that, had it existed and been heeded, might have kept his own father alive. He spent his career making sure cargo was stored the way the rules said, and he never fully knew why the work meant so much to him. Lorene lived to be 90. She died in 2003 in Texas City, with her 4 children and a room full of grandchildren around her. She never knew the name of the dock hand who'd found the tally book. She only knew that when a company told her that her husband's death was nobody's fault, somebody had refused to believe it and had dug until the truth came up out of the ground like water. It sits today in the Texas City Library's local history room. In a glass case among the dock and port records an old checkers tally book, cloth-bound, swollen with damp and years, kept and donated by the family of Silas Pruitt. It is open to a page dated 3 weeks before the fire. In Silas Pruitt's blunt pencil, among the columns of loads and weights, is the line that broke the company's act of God, a note that the foreman had been warned, in writing, that the cargo was stored over the limit, with the date and the foreman's initials beside it. A small typed card reads, "The dock keeps its own memory." Lorene Babcock kept a copy of that page in her family Bible her whole life, folded against the page where Earl's name was written. For years, no one outside the Dock families knew how the Babcock widow had beaten the company when so many others lost. The full story surfaced the way Dock stories do through Raymond, the safety inspector, the 5-year-old grown gray, late in his life, helping the library catalog the old port records. He held Silas Pruitt's tally book in his own hands. and finally read the page that had saved his family. And old Silas, near the end, had told Raymond one thing the lawyer never had, that the man who'd come and found the book and pointed the lawyer to it had been a quiet young drifter just back from the war who'd worked the docks 11 days, asked the old men what they'd seen, and moved on west without a name. Raymond, who had spent his life keeping people safe, finally understood where that calling had come from. If this story reached you, do me a favor, pass it on. Share it with a veteran in your life. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. There are more Bronson stories coming, and unfortunately, they don't make men like Charles Bronson anymore.